This is Monday, May 9th, 2012. I'm in my Russian apartment and been working on this Trayvon Martin killing. And this would give me an opportunity to explore some very meaningful things in my life experience. The purpose of this video is an introduction to my study of the killing and the subsequent media activity. And I realize this is quite important to me. Well, why would that be important? It's important because, and at first it looked like this poor little kid was accosted. The pictures they showed looked like he was a little toddler, a 12-year-old or so. But it really went bananas. The next thing I know, I see where there was posters offering $10,000 dead or alive. And then later on, the Black Panthers only indicated that they were offering $10,000 for citizen's arrest. But it turns out that this fair-complected little black boy was not the person that was killed. It was a picture of him when he was 12 years old, and he was a 6'3", well-tattooed, very worldly young man who had tattoos and a history of involvement in the street and being expelled from school. He was expelled at the time the event happened. But the hate for white people that I saw is what shocked me. And I'm used to this hate here in the Caucasus. It's used much of Chechnya, if you check the statistics, has been ethnically cleansed, and they just right here 5 miles away where the airport is, they just arbitrarily shot a whole busload of tourists, a minibus, and they blew up the ski lift at Elbrus here, trying to put fear into people. I have a hard time understanding this, but I see it. I see the hate speech on the part of Obama's pastor about damning America and the hatred. And I've seen it on the part of some anti-war people. I don't intuitively understand it because I was never indoctrinated to hate as a child. This killing of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman mainly got my attention because of the hate for white people that I saw in some of the news broadcasts. Secondarily was the way it was used for others to get media attention. People like attention somehow. But my main concern is understanding what harms a healthy culture, what destroys the child rearing environment, what destroys the safety of homes. And on my website, I will leave a link to it, a discussion with Roy Masters, with a black pastor that has a lot of insight into these things. But this segment that I'm putting on is I'm amazed at myself. I'm talking about my experiences with black people, and I don't think about people being black or white in my personal life. I actually have two black grandsons. In the middle 90s, I paid half the money to adopt them from Haiti to help my daughter and her husband out in that project. They went to Haiti to adopt a young boy. They had three girls, and they wanted a couple boys, or wanted a boy. And this young boy that they were interested in, he was shy, hiding, and there was another older boy that was so helpful to them that they decided to adopt them both. So I have two black grandchildren. I have 13 grandchildren. Two of them are black. Sebastian is the younger one, and Wesley is the older one. I'm very proud. Wesley's a veteran. He served in the Army, repair helicopters. Wesley was in Germany and Iraq. Here's a picture of 5 of my 13 grandchildren. Two of them black. It's Wesley and Sebastian. And here's a picture of one of my granddaughters and her black friend. Now, here's a picture of Sebastian when he was younger in the 90s. And a picture of Wesley around 2000. And here's Wesley now in the military, 2010. He's a veteran now. Very proud of the service that he gave to the country, and have no difficulty. It didn't come to my mind about that there's black people in my family, as I don't make it wasn't a difference to me. They're my grandchildren. That it just didn't come to my mind because I don't have a problem with someone being black, or it's their behavior that I have a problem with. And even some of my own grandchildren, the world's got a hold of them. They're filled up with tattoos, on drugs and stuff like that. I have no control over these things. It's so far from my world. I'm so uncomfortable with what goes on in more and more crime and drugs and so forth. But that's another matter. Anyway, show you some pictures of my family and my grandson Wesley. I've got one of them in his military uniform there, and that was in 2010. And one of the family, my daughter Anna, and her husband and 5 children. 2 of them black, and Sarah with her black friend. These things aren't thought of. It doesn't have anything to do with race, but corrupt behavior, and someone without the foundation of a healthy upbringing is a problem to themselves and everybody else, whether they're black, white, or Mexican, or and I have a Mexican son-in-law. uh, the behavior, how important the home is. I taught physics. I went from working in a steel mill to working in carborundum research on nuclear ceramics, and got degrees in math and physics, and went to teach high school. And I no sooner got established with a contract, and my wife divorced me, and I went teaching, so I had my summers free to do research and do things with my children. She divorced me, took my three children, 7, 8, and 9, and my home and my income. But I had the joy of teaching physics when they were interested in having people for the space program, and they had developed this curriculum and realized that children need to have hands-on activity to have operational skill. And the Kennedy space program, they found out the engineers didn't know how to do the sophisticated math, and the sophisticated math didn't know anything about engineering. They had to do a one-man job. They had to send 2 people, and they rebuilt the curriculum where students were learning by investigation, not by lecture. And so that's what I had. When my wife divorced me, I was teaching Harvard project physics, my own take on it, but the equipment. I had class sizes of 14 to 16, 7 or 8 pairs of students. The students teach one another. My job was just to help them evaluate their reports and set up the experiments for them and make sure one person didn't hurt another. But it was a joy to be with them once they got engaged. But I realized I had raised 3 children to the point 5, 6, and 7, and I really cared. They were a product of my desire to have children. But I realized these children that I was teaching physics, they were the cream of the crop. They had to go through all the math and all the physics. There was a few of them were goofy. Professor's children. My high school was on the same plot of land as the SUNY Amherst, State University of New York, Amherst campus. And if you want to teach a goofy kid, teach some professor of psychology's kid. I'll tell you, that's a whole nother story. Human behavior isn't in a book. The best behavior is the children raised on farms, because of farm, family, and fellowship. This was just in 2010, December, the G20 meeting was in South Korea. This little country, the 15th largest economy now. So they're in the G20, and BBC had a program on this G20. How magnificent, and the hustle and bustle of this magnificent city, and everybody prospering and flourishing, and they showed the background of the Korean War with Seoul all broken down, and then they showed the same scene today, wonderful. But then they had a Catholic priest, a Korean man, on saying, yeah, but there's a problem. We have the highest suicide rate in the world. The main cause of death in South Korea between 10 and 40 is suicide. And the priest is saying it wasn't like that before the war, before all this modernity. The home isn't there. Maybe their parents love their children, but they're not in the home. The mothers are working, the fathers are working, the children are being raised rather than given a mother's loving bond with a breast. They're stuffed with a bottle and put in daycare. In America, 1 in 44 boys now have autism. When I was born in 1939, before the women went into the war effort in the factories and left the home, it was 1 in 17,000. It's a no-brainer. We need to respect homes, children's right to a mammalian nursing bond. And what I realized teaching physics, it was a joy. It my heart was broken, but I had these children that I'd get engaged in studying physical reality, God's creation. Oh, it was beautiful. They enjoyed it so much, and it was such a pleasure to teach them and guide them. I wasn't teaching them, I was helping them discover. What I'm really interested in this class struggle is understanding how human nature is corrupted to get into this, rather than caring about children's rights. Children's rights. And I understood the younger the child is, the more important. And they need their mother. A child has a newborn and an infant have a negative reaction to another woman's voice. Their mother's voice causes their heart rate to go down. And we're learning so much physiologically how important these things are. We've got to start respecting the children's rights to a mammalian nursing bond with their mother and a father that's providing the home. And the mother can stay there and make a home for the children and the husband. Now, I'm putting in links to my website and YouTube. You can go there and look into some of these things. My website's a mess. It's so big that I've reorganized it and putting things together as much as I can with physics, and tried to put together a rational foundation for stopping the nonsense that's destroying our youth, whether they're black or yellow or white or red or whatever. Now, let's care. And as far as the socialized medicine, I do back Obama, but the doctors need to be on salary and evaluated for the quality of their work. Just like students should be evaluating their teachers, teachers should be evaluating their administrators, their support system. Doctors should be evaluated by their patients, by their peers, by those who have to oversee the quality of their work too. I was on a student part of a committee to develop professor evaluation, student evaluation at the University of Buffalo. It's a powerful thing. We've got a culture that's depriving those who are being served of evaluating their service. You know, these are just some basic things. I don't want to get too distracted here. There's much other work to do. And I hope that we can get a clear picture of what's going on with the Trayvon Martin death and all the menagerie going on associated with it, and all the hate white that seems to be justified. How is it you can say in Kenmore, New York, where I come from, you can be arrested for hollering at your wife now? But if you say something against a black person, it's hate speech, you can be arrested. If you say something against homosexual, it's hate speech, you can be arrested. How can these people put out posters, wanted dead or alive, $10,000, and how can they get on television with the hate white people's speech and not get arrested for hate speech? I don't understand it. Please, follow up this black pastor and Roy Masters. They hit the nail on the head. I have an audio of it and links to the pastor's website. He has online things you can go to too. All right. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video here, and that it's helpful. When I say enjoy, it helps you to understand things better and make more sense of the world, and maybe contribute to making it a better world. Thank you. In 1967, I had gone from being an electrician's helper and an electrician at Bethlehem Steel in Buffalo, New York, to be in charge of maintenance at Lake Erie Rolling Mill. That was an old wick wire steel mill that had been closed down, but a company from Canada and another company from New York opened up one of the mills. We were making a reinforcement rod. We were getting steel bars from Germany and rolling them down into this coils of reinforcement steel. We had race riots that summer, 1967, and the government got business associations together, and to solve this problem was a number of black youths in the inner city with no opportunity for work. So they got the businesses to agree to hire these young blacks, and ended up our little one mill operation there. Hired an electrical helper that was one of these young black men from Buffalo's inner city. And I was very frustrated at first because he was always off somewhere just listening to his radio. And I actually wanted to dismiss him because I would have never lasted in a job if I had behaved the way he was behaving, and it was discouraging to me. But the superintendent said no, made a commitment to keep him for a time. Well, as it turns out, within a month, the young fella came around and started taking responsibility and was a valued employee. So that says something for giving someone a chance and not being too harsh to start with, but that's a whole nother story. When I was 19, I was in Seguin, Texas, working at a store there. It'd be like a Sears store, but it was privately owned, individual, and had a gas station attached, and I worked at the gas station. They had restrooms there, and they were still labeled for blacks only and whites only. Although by that time there had been the doing away with separate facilities. I'm going to regress. That was after I was out of the Air Force. I might have been 20 or even 21. I had worked in Colorado for the winter. I had been laid off from construction on an agri-power project. Now, the background there was the previous events. I'm going to regress my experiences with blacks. When I was 17, I went in the Air Force and went to radio school at Illinois, just outside of St. Louis, Missouri, on the other side of the river, for a radio school at the Air Force Base there at Belleville, Scott Air Force Base. And going into St. Louis to the USO, and I met an elderly black man, and the way he spoke to me was, "Yes, sir." And "yes, sir," very respectful. And it caught my attention because nobody spoke to me with respect particularly. So that stuck in my mind. And at 16, I was on the road selling magazines, and on one of these was the first time out, we'd go a different city every week, and I had broken off with a man to start another crew. I was in Gary, Indiana, in a hotel for the night, and down to the restaurant to eat supper. And a black man, blind, came with his people and was going to sit at one of the tables near us, and they wouldn't let him sit because he was black. Now this was this time I was 16, so it was 3 years before, and integration hadn't happened everywhere yet. Turns out the man that they wouldn't allow in the restaurant in Gary, Indiana, was Blind Ray Charles, which this whole affair shocked me. And before that, when I was 15, the summer I was 15, I hitchhiked, bought a ride to Tucson, Arizona from New York, from Niagara Falls, with a Marine going back to a Marine base there, and hitchhiked from there to the Air Force base. I'm having trouble with grammar now. A friend of mine, Roger Chaplin, was in the Air Force. The year before, I had visited him at Kankakee, Iran, Air Force base there in Illinois. And this time he was in Arizona. I can't remember the name of the air base. Tombstone was where the Marine was going. Tombstone, Arizona. But at any rate, I visited Roger there at the air base in Arizona, and was hitchhiking back, and ended up getting a ride that got me out of a desert spot where I'd gotten off at a split in the road, and the trucker was going to Houston, Texas, and I got a ride there to it. He said, "You get you to the truck stop, and there'll be people there that'll give you a ride, probably where you're going up in New York." At any rate, well, I got there to the truck stop, and there was a restaurant next door, or right by it, or at it. I don't remember which, but I remember going in there, and I remember being told about blacks couldn't go in there. This is when I was 15, summer I was 15. And I was told a story that a black man had walked in the restaurant drunk and had been shot dead, and the people that shot him weren't even brought to trial. But this shocked me. And the experience before that was my first year in 7th grade. I failed that year, but I had gone from a country school, 2-room school. Well, actually, it was a 1-room school at Grange Hall. That was my first year. So I went to Wilson my second year of 7th grade. A little bit older than most 7th graders because I had failed 2 years. But from the country school, that was my first time going away from the country school. It had a bus pick us up and take us to Wilson, New York, which was 15 miles away, but it took over an hour trip because it had to go up and down all the farm roads picking up kids to take them to Wilson Central School. And that was where I had my first experience with a black person. And I really thought nothing of it. Wilson is a lot of fruit and vegetables, and there were a number of black families that would go with the crops north and south. They wouldn't stay for the winter. They'd just come picking fruit and vegetables to make make a living and then go back south and work places there. But this one family, the man got a job with the cannery in Wilson, New York. He was a black man with a black family. Just so happens their name was Johnson, and my name is Johnson. Oh, there's a lot of jokes among the black people about how's your Johnson, because apparently there were slave owners named Johnson, and the slaves they owned were given the last name of their owner. How's your Johnson? It's talking about your private parts. But the the young man, the son, who was his father, got the job in the canning factory. His name was Johnson, so he sat next to me. That was my first experience with blacks. It was just another person to me, and that's all I ever knew. I was never brought up with any racial slurs, hatred, or anything. I grew up in a farm town, Pekin, New York. There were no blacks. There was an Indian reservation a mile away, but never anything negative about blacks. Black people would come through and maybe work on the farms sometimes. I did not that I had acquaintance with them. They weren't in the town that I grew up in. So I just this racial problem was something strange to me, and I remember as a young man, I would have been willing to adopt a black child to try and give him a better life, but when I thought about it, I wouldn't want to. At that time, I wouldn't want to have lived in America because of the prejudice that they might run into. I thought maybe if I was going to have black children, it would be better to live in the Caribbean or something like that. Those are just my thoughts. But these experiences and part of a life stage left a mark. They all printed me. And I come to understand we're not an individual. We're a group. Our different life stages get bypassed in different areas of the brain as we develop clearer insights. The old way of worldview gets bypassed, and then we develop a new worldview in a different area. But the old worldview, just like the fetal life stage or the suckling child stage or the crawling child, that all those stages have their own identity, and they're in us, often integrated into our life by the intimacy of a private relationship. These things stuck in my mind, and I know that when we have a part of us that has feeling, that is shocked, that stores something and ties up some of our awareness, attention, energy, our ability, especially if it has to do with caring. It puts a little enclosure, and it takes part of that awareness, attention, energy to care away, and it's an unresolved shock or something like that. It can have a hypnotic effect. So that's why this is interesting to me, because I've seen the racial hatred. I've seen what I've seen more of is black hatred for whites, and the vulgarity, and the experience that I had that was so negative was teaching high school, and after the riots in the 50s, 60s, they started building subsidized apartments in the suburbs. I was in a suburb of Buffalo teaching Sweet Home, and they built subsidized apartments and brought blacks out of the inner city. And so all of a sudden we had a number of blacks in our school. And there was many problems. First time I saw girls fighting, and I saw one girl, black girl, with heels on, trying to kick another black girl in the head, and it shocked me. And it was at a time that AIDS awareness was happening, and we weren't supposed to touch children when they were fighting because we might get blood on us and or whatever. But I still wouldn't let a fight like that go on. Another problem at the high school was when we would have a dance, the black girls didn't have anybody to take them. The black boys preferred white girls, and the white girls preferred black boys. There was no problem in finding relationships, but white boys weren't interested in the black girls. So the black girls had to go to a dance without a date, and then nobody would dance with them. And the assistant principal at a faculty meeting said about the problem and what could we do to help out. So that was another awareness of blacks. Then I come to find out something, that there's a big similarity between the black culture and anthroculture, care for children and raising a family. A lot of similarities between the blacks in America and Russia. And I come to understand, somebody had explained the black culture on the plantation, or call it southern culture, and who had the actual power. And what they explained was the white lord had the absolute power. Oh, it's the same in Russia, only everybody was white at any rate. So the landlord had the power. Well, the slave women, whether white like in Russia or black like in America, the slave women made the beds, cooked the food, cared for the babies, and gave sexual flavors to the landlord. They had the second place of power, the house slaves. Women, not men. The third place of power was the white housewoman. She might have supervisory capacity, but she didn't prepare the food, she didn't take care of the baby. Functionally, she didn't have the power to do anything because she didn't do anything for anybody. Her place was to look pretty and give air to the landlord. So she was third in the power structure. And fourth in the power structure were the males out in the field. They were below the females. There were females in the black community had more status and power than the black males. With a lot of similarities in Russia. They even had to practice that the lords in Russia would sleep with one of their serfs' maidens the night of her wedding, so that the serf would have no bragging rights. That shocked me to find that. I was in Poland too. And the word slave comes from Slav. I knew that, but I just last week come across where it was actually Otto the Great, the Germanic lord that conquered Slavic people, and actually married one of his Slavic slaves and made some kind of a aristocrat out of the son with her. But they enslaved so many of the Slavs. It's where the word slave comes from. There's another thing about how many of our forefathers died to free the black people, and that white hate I don't understand. I never had black hate. Hate is a different thing. I really need to study more because it's not part of my inner world. And so I don't intuitively understand. It wasn't part of my upbringing. Very important to understand, though, when you see the hate crimes going on here in the Caucasus, that the Islamic hatred that they will
kill themselves and others out of this hatred and serving this God of violence and vengeance that they serve. It's hard for me to, and then how it's painted as a nice picture. We have Jesus in our book too, but they cover that up. Jesus is inferior. He wasn't the Christ, and he made mud birds and they fly. And they say the Bible is false, but they have this falseness about Christ making mud birds and then blowing on them and they fly away. That's in the Quran. It comes from an apocryphal infancy gospel of Thomas, one of those that were written a couple hundred years after Christ, and nobody took serious, but it was in common. There's a Gnosticism. It was a product of that Gnosticism. They're still alive and well too. But at any rate, this hatred, and I put this case of Zimmerman and Martin under the heading of class struggle. And I told you the story of Russian slavery and American slavery and the different hierarchy, because it's here in Russia. You just don't see, because they're all white. But they end up knowing their place. Then the lords run away. Well, actually, the lords were in Russia before communism. There were a bunch of noble people. The class struggle was taught so much hatred for these people, and said they were all bad, so they killed them or run them off and took all their stuff. And Olga was saying today how her father used to lament the communists would take like his father's cattle and horses, and they'd give them to the poor people that had nothing, and in a year they were dead. The poor cow would be killed either for food or just die from lack of care, and then they still had nothing. But once free from communism, they have this idea that the upper people just take whatever they want. So there's more billionaires in Russia, and Russia owns most of the Riviera now, while people are so poor here. But I shouldn't complain too much. I was to the dentist, had an infection. I had my third injection for the infection in my gum. Paid 100 rubles. It's $32 cents a ruble. I paid a little over $3 to go to the dentist and get an injection, and it's a wonderful, beautiful place. That's another story. All right, back to the Trevor Martin and why it's important to me. Because I care. I was cared for, and I'm able to care. And these incidences of violating people put a mark in my soul. And something I remember, just like I remember exactly where I was sitting at a little cheap Chinese restaurant with my first wife, and the television up there when they announced John Kennedy was shot. And John Kennedy had been our savior from all the fear of the world coming to nuclear holocaust, with Russia had taken nuclear missiles into Cuba just before that. But this is my introduction, and I hope also it helps you to understand how important it is with you. This had an ex-student I talked to, and I started talking about homosexuality, and he hung up on me. He can't talk about a lot of negative things. That's another subject, but you need to talk about everything with love and patience for yourself. We are a group, not just physiologically, the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, the bird brain, the right and left hemisphere, the verbal and nonverbal parts, but each life stage. and they are get hardwired. They're there. It'd be nice to get into autism and understand what we do understand autism. It's gone from 1 in 17,000 when I was born to 1 boy in 44 last year in America. It's a tragedy, terrible. It's another painful thing. But this is enough to explain why it's important for me to try and look into what's going on with the Zimmerman